Yes. Nice. No, you have to increase one out. Okay. How about is that everyone? Sorry, do all teams in this room consent to the live stream? I'm good. Okay, CL? Yeah. OG? Okay, okay, alright. Thank you. Of course. Is it live on YouTube? Oh, because people can watch live. But mostly for you to watch yourself. You can watch yourself. So nice. I don't know, what's my life? I'm so sorry.
Voice on.
All right. This is the start.
All right, welcome to the quarterfinals of Penang Debate Open Championship. Congratulations all teams for making it this far. All right, so without further ado, I'll invite Prime Minister to open up the debate. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, governments attempting to artificially maintain overly bloated human populations by continuously attempting to raise up birth rates, ladies and gentlemen, imperfect, the very same imperfect governments are unable to estimate markets, unable to estimate whether or not there'll be enough jobs to sustain a bloated population as is currently existent, and resist the trend of all developing countries to reduce in size to become more nuclear, more focused, more sustainable populations, ladies and gentlemen, is a fool's errand on the opposition side of the house. There's no inherent value in maintaining a large population when your population is shrinking. It is the natural order of things when individuals don't want to choose children, rather focus on nuclear families and focus their resources in ensuring the success of their children, ladies and gentlemen. Those decisions shouldn't be muddled with the government, by the government and incentivizing poor middle-class families to make irrational and horrible decisions for their own lives, putting not only themselves in harm's way, but also putting entire societies in harm's way, ladies and gentlemen. Sit down. But first and foremost, what a range of things that the government bench supports on this side of the house. The first thing, we think that in the modern world, when developing countries have shrinking populations, it's absolutely abundantly clear that most developing countries utilize immigration in order to compensate for those losses, ladies and gentlemen. That in most cases, immigration is a lot more a safe bet. Like, for example, you have a definitive return of investment because you don't need to wait for that guy to grow up 21 years to find out whether or not to become an investment banker or scientist, right? Or you can make sure that you can incentivize a set number of people in a set number of times. time, as opposed to waiting and hoping that people take up your financial incentives on your side of the house. That's why immigration is a valuable alternative. But secondly, we think in developing countries and rich countries, especially where we're talking about in this particular day, we're very happy to support high taxation and redistributive systems, like in many, for example, European countries where they are able to sustain nuclear type families and low populations or stable populations, while at the same time having redistributive, equitable tax systems that can make sure they can sustain their pension systems and welfare systems and things like that. There's no inherent value in maintaining a bloated population on that side of the house. That's why I'll talk more about other alternatives that we can have and why human functions no longer require large-scale populations later on. That, Jason.
Would you be possibly okay with India implementing a one-child policy?
No, I am not okay with one-child, but I'll get to that later. But let's just say that the one-child policy led to millions of undocumented illegal children that harm, cannot go to the hospital and die a horrible death at home because when they get sick, they can't go because they're illegal. Sex-selective abortions in China, for example, ladies and gentlemen, and many circumstances where abuse cases can't be reported because parents have illegal children and they can't go to court. We would love for you to defend the one-child policy, and CG would love that as well. So, first argument, ladies and gentlemen, is why this disproportionately harms the poor and middle class, ladies and gentlemen. Let's first establish that the lion's share of any population is most likely to be the poor and middle class, and definitively not the rich. The reason why this is important is because these are the populations that are most likely to take up your financial incentives or whatever incentives on the opposition bench. The reason why this is also incredibly important is because these are also the individuals that are most likely making suboptimal economic choices in taking up short-term economic incentives in order to fulfill short-term economic desires on that side of the house. We've all known, ladies and gentlemen, that poor individuals and middle-class individuals are the people who face the brunt of the financial crisis in 2008, when banks offered short-term investment loans, ladies and gentlemen, or short-term housing loans, because they can see the immediate return for that, but not see the long-term implication, not being able to sustain the long-term multiplying cost of that particular debt, ladies and gentlemen. But what happens here is that people in the modern world are unable to foresee the exponential multiplying cost of having children, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that having one child and trying to send that person to college, feeding that child, ladies and gentlemen, is an incredible amount of debt. Millions, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, in developing countries. What more? Multiple children per middle class family. We just think it's not financially tenable for a middle class family making 10,000 ringgit a year, ladies and gentlemen, or the equivalent in the United States of America, to have, for example, 2 or even 3 children when they are unable to even survive the debt of one child going to a college. But you can ask Jason B, for example. But thirdly, we think that this is also especially important considering when you think about in developing countries where you see 2 factors, and this is really important for the opposition to note, that you either have high degrees of automation, which means that the job markets in most developing countries are decimated in nature, ladies and gentlemen, that there are no job opportunities even if you get a degree. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that if people don't get a degree and they spread themselves too thin, can't send their 3 kids to college, they end up poor on the welfare system, burdening the state, further harming the problem on the opposition bench. If they get a degree, it's not even a sustainable thing because large-scale people don't get jobs because of degree automation. And we're going to contextualize this in the 21st century. We think that in the next 20 years, we're going to also see a large scale of automation increasing into artificial intelligence as well. In that particular circumstance, we think that, if, for example, considering that Google, Uber have already large-scale automation in a lot of jobs, we think that that's also something we have to foresee in the future when we're talking about developing countries, and those are the kind of jobs that are also going to disappear. Even skilled jobs are going to disappear into the future, ladies and gentlemen. That's not something that can be laughed at, considering that that's an actual possibility in the next 10 to 20 years. We think that's important. That means what you have is people spreading themselves too thin for a short-term benefit, for an uncertain return in the future, with a more bleak opportunities that are available in the future as well, ladies and gentlemen. Wages will be driven down because of automation, as well as opportunities are disappearing also because of automation. That means sustaining a boomer generation level population rather than having it shrink during Generation Y, Generation Z, ladies and gentlemen, is unsustainable because the global economy, global markets just cannot sustain it into the future. Developing countries must be nuclear in order to be sustainable. And in fact, because of all these technological advancements, that's why we have enough resources in order to sustain the nuclear family, ladies and gentlemen, and the robust tax system. We think that's important. It's also incredibly important to note that these are families are being laden with debt, ladies and gentlemen, pushed into poverty, unable to sustain themselves, burdens on the state subsequently going to accrue all the problems, and governments are unable to sustain this. If we focus on the word proactively, that means making preemptive decisions in order to adjust populations. Can governments assess whether or not technological advancements are going to shrink opportunities more? Are governments accurately able to estimate? Maybe to some degree, but certainly not enough to shift entire nations of populations and artificially manage that, ladies and gentlemen, in order to create all the harms that we've talked about here. The poor and middle class are going to bear the brunt of it. We have a very amount of alternatives, and many developed countries in the world currently do this already. It is the most sensible thing to do. I'm very happy to propose.
It is great that sort of opening government wants to fight for families and wants to make sure that parents don't struggle when catering for their child. However, I think the Prime Minister was confused in several aspects because we're recognizing that it works in both ways. So you cannot just narrow down the debate to underpopulated countries, but at the same time characterize countries who are underpopulated as developing countries, because that doesn't make sense. Countries like China, India, even Malaysia's population increases every single year. You cannot say that these are countries which are underpopulated. There are also countries like the Scandinavian countries who do control their population size, and I think it's completely legitimate for them to do so, because when governments do this, this ensures that when they try to cater to their people, it's done much better. It's much easier to control your resources and spread it out to individuals on the ground when you can truly measure the number of people on the ground. The stance coming from opening up opposition is simple. We think the government should actively control the population size in proportion to the national resources which you have, and also taking into account your citizens' economic levels. So for example, if there are a lot of poor people within your country, in contexts like India or Bangladesh, this way we will lower the population rate, and we think that is important. So implementing things like birth control policies, etc. The principle is that the state should always use the power which they have in their hands to help their citizens. This is the side of the house that chooses to stay complicit and not do anything at all about it. I honestly think that is horrible. Because even if you want to argue, and the Prime Minister claims that the state cannot truly measure the future and what's truly going to happen there, what's the comparative? You don't do anything at all. You allow these families to continue growing and continue suffering in debt like you claim. I don't understand why your world is better. No, thank you. 2 points of rebuttal. Firstly, are the poor and middle class actually helped underside of government? So 2 things. Firstly, if you claim that people cannot see the struggles of supporting a child and they cannot see the debt that they may fall into, you are the side that lets them fall into these traps. You push these individuals when you choose not to say anything about it, when you don't want to control the human population, and you allow these families who are poor to continuously grow and expand. I think that's where their lives are much worse. But secondly, on this idea of automation, so if automation is inevitable, under your side, more people are going to lose their jobs. More people are going to be left jobless and unable care for their children and families. I think that's horrible because you don't control the population. That's why you'll have more poor people who become victims under your world. But let's answer the second question. Is it one-child policy bad? So we may have undocumented children and these people have to suffer in horrible lives. But the comparative is, under your side, you don't control the population. Therefore, you will have more poor families. You have more poor children and not enough money to provide for these individuals, which is why it's important to control that very idea. No, thank you. But let's understand this, right? Overpopulation is inevitable when the state stops controlling and doing anything. When your state says, we don't care about the human population and we are to do nothing about it, that's why people will never see the need to reduce the family members. They will never see the need to keep their family small. And that's why the generations are going to continue growing. More children are going to be born into poor communities and more individuals have to suffer as a whole. But before I proceed, I'll take closing.
Okay. In my country, China, there are like so many men and women forcibly sterilized by the government. Many children, including my cousins, live 10 years or more of miserable life without public schooling or like hospitals. How do you explain that under your paradigm?
Okay, so if we have thousands of children who suffer because lack of facilities to provide to them, we think under your side it's much worse. Because at least under our side, we can reduce the number of children so that they can fit into the number of schools we have. Under your side, you do nothing. You get even more children, more people have to suffer, and I think that's horrible. So I'm going to prove in my speech why these policies best tackle overpopulation in 4 points. Firstly, with regards to poverty. Secondly, on how regulation is much more difficult in the world of government. Thirdly, how you lose more resources and why that's harmful for developing nations. And fourthly, with regards to the environment. So firstly, poverty. Let's understand that within a lot of poor communities, and these are also people they want to fight for, we think, no thank you. We think these are individuals, and especially children, where there are lack of resources to provide to these individuals. Where states like China cannot provide to every child on the ground and provide everyone with education. We think when your welfare is not enough, that's why the lives of these individuals are horrible. And when they have to suffer under your side, why do we think this is worse? No, thank you. We think that's why these individuals, when families and fathers cannot actually get money to care for their family, we think that's why they're more likely to adopt the life of crime. And this way, your crime rates will also be much higher within these nations. Why is that harmful? Because this means the perception towards the poorer communities, the perception towards these individuals will forever be one which is negative. Meaning, it's even harder for them to want to break that stereotype, actually break into society as a whole. But also understanding that this is a perpetual cycle. So they will continuously live horrible lives. Why? Because when your education is bad and you don't have the funds to pay and get into private universities, that's why it's more difficult for them to climb the social ladder and improve their situation at all. At least under our side, we can better control the population to care for these individuals. But secondly, on the idea of regulation. So secondly, on the idea of regulation. We think within developing countries like India and Bangladesh, where we think the corporations exploit the underprivileged on a massive scale. What do we mean by this? Where China, you have your factories, and India, it's very difficult to control child labor. We think on a comparative, it's much more difficult under your side to control it because there'll be even more of these individuals who are going to be victimized. We think that is horrible because it's much easier under our side when we have lesser people to control and keep track of in general. We think it's much better under the world of opposition. But thirdly, why do resources reduce now? Because when you don't have enough money to support your citizens, two possibilities. Firstly, you funnel more money into welfare. What does this mean? This means federal money that could have gone to things like education and healthcare for other citizens will now be lost and reduced. But secondly, you could either receive more aid from other countries. Why is this harmful? This makes them even more dependent on other countries, and that's bad for developing countries. But even then, it's not effective in the long run because the population will continuously increase and you do nothing to stop it. Either way, we think it is horrible. We think you also harm the environment even more. When your individuals aren't educated, they have no access to green technology, we think these poor and middle class individuals are the ones you harm at the end of the day.
Leader of Opposition. Now to forward the case from the government, Deputy Prime Minister.
Sorry, wait. Alright.
Let's talk about overpopulation and underpopulation. Myth talked about these countries which are often problematic. Underpopulated countries having policies to increase population. Countries like Singapore, like Nordic countries, which they need to prove is working anyway. They just said that it's true and it's happening, but cannot prove anything, don't have any logical links to anything that they're saying. Secondly, Myth also talked about overpopulated countries, which are either developed or underdeveloped. Developed countries where things like automation is an issue, things like automation is an issue where education means less and less. We've also talked about underdeveloped countries, which is what OMO really wants to talk about. They didn't even respond to the other parts of this argument anyway. They wanted to talk about how these countries are problematic because you allow people in India to live and have kids, and that's horrible. How dare they have kids? But they need to focus on one thing: that within these countries, when you have overpopulation, what's the context of these countries? Countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, or India. These are countries that are focused on labor. Countries that are focused on having access to labor to ensure that they can make a lot of money. Countries that focus on corporations entering and you working in these factories or having agrarian jobs. This is how China uplifted itself, using their excess population to develop their own country, making use of all the human capital that they have. Once they have solved that, however, they needed to solve the problem of control, which is what China did with the one-child policy. So this is the issue that we wanted to talk about. That we've already talked about the ability for these people to enter and develop economically, and once they already have that level of development, it's more likely for them to be able to have better education, for them to provide their kids better education, for their kids to then understand and learn about sex education and family control and family economics. That their kids will understand and calculate the risk of having a child and the economic burdens of having a child. That their children will understand the fact that having a child means that you want the best nourishment, you want the best education, you want the best social environments for your children. The very same fact that my parents, that I have 4 siblings, my parents have 13 siblings, speaks wonders, because there is an economic development and understanding that your kids need to go to school. That the older ideas of an Indian education, of the Indian or the rural Indian Bangladesh population, is one that thinks the idea of having kids is good, that you will have economic development. And yes, we are seeing that will happen in the long term. That these are countries that automation is not an issue. So they should, if they want to talk about automation, they actually want to respond, please respond to the correct context. You don't have automation or AI issues in India or Bangladesh. You have that in the US, Singapore, Japan. But before that, yes, close it.
Yeah, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If the poor are so irrational, how are they going to make choices for the better economy, better social decisions, and so on?
Exactly through what Myth already said, but we giving them redistributive taxes, taxing on the rich, giving them sex education, and uplifting the poor, providing their children with jobs. And what we want to talk about the ability for these countries to then exploit other people. Now, here's the problem. The politics in Bangladesh is one that's highly corrupt and one that's highly exploitative. They exploit the poor. They want the poor to work for them, to work in their factories. These people have no incentives for a lower Bangladeshi population. What they want is more workers. Politicians in Bangladesh or India has very little incentives. Corporations as well has very little incentives to enter these countries when there is a lower population, when there is a lower unskilled population. And this is exactly what India and Bangladesh needs. They are thriving economies, they are growing economies, they are developing countries. And developing countries need this level of economic development. Now, before they want to talk about things like resource or ability for these countries to focus on, let's remember the fact that resource allocation or distribution is not a problem. Resource is not a problem. It's the issue of allocation and redistribution. The very fact remains that first world countries are rich because their economic development and their agricultural subsistence is efficient. That farming or works in Asia, Africa, or South America is not as efficient as ones in Europe and the US. And this is the issue that we need to solve. The very fact remains that even if you have less people in Bangladesh, these people will still be oppressed, and because there are now less jobs overall. Because there are less jobs overall, there are less ability for them to make use of that human capital. Now let's look at the trends of what's happening here. They want to talk about countries like China, which has one-child policy, a blatant disregard for human rights and the ability for people to actualize and actually control the children, which leads to things like having undocumented cases of kids, having undocumented kids, which then cannot go to school, which then cannot have basic education, which then cannot have basic healthcare because they're not documented, which means that parents, especially in conservative countries who want male childs, will just kill or abort female fetuses because these female fetuses can't carry out the male name. These female fetuses is a burden in conservative countries because they view women as inferior in these countries anyway. This is the issues that they need to solve. They want to push one-child policy. And even then, notice that all they want to do is talk about one-child policy without even mentioning how it works. That you do not have the same level of control in India and Bangladesh as China. These are massively different countries. What we want to talk about is the ability for these people to have that level of choices. That even that in the US, the average cost of raising a child is $1.5 million. And that does not include a college education. These things puts families into debt. Puts families who works double or triple jobs to ensure that their children can work and can have a better education. Things that you do not have in developed countries or undeveloped countries opening.
So under your side, when you want to grow your economy and your population continuously grows and you're incapable to deal with that, how do you deal with that situation?
Literally what I just said. Once you grow your economy, you have basic development, your workers cannot afford to send their children to universities, provide them with jobs, provide them with better jobs. Their children will understand the economic capacity of having multiple jobs. That this has been proven multiple times all around the world. It's been proven here. If you just take a look at how many children or siblings your grandparents and parents had, it's just a huge multiple number. That once that you do understand the fact that you want a better life for your children, that in the current context, in the 21st century, you want the children to be best prepared as compared to what their parents had to live through. This is the trend, this is the trend that we want to talk about. The issue that the world population will be plateauing anyway. That the WHO predicted that by 2015, the world population will be plateauing by 10 billion people. And that's the thing that we want to talk about. That any organic change will reach to an organic equilibrium. These are things. These are actual population realities. OO needs to talk on us about that. OO needs to actually tell us what their roadmap is, and not just say OCP is great or one child policy. No, we are proud to propose.
Thank you, the Prime Minister, not to open up the debate. I call for the leader.
Yeah.
The reason OG will lose this debate is because they cannot decide what do they want. Do they want to talk about countries where people know that having children is a cost to them and are actively pursuing smaller, more nuclear families, or countries where people don't know where their kids will be a cost and continuously having more children, incurring more debt and plunging themselves deeper into poverty? Do they want to talk about countries where overpopulation is an issue and labor exploitation is something that they want to prevent? Or do they want to pursue economic growth where apparently having more children is important because they can use that excess labor to build up the economy and then somehow achieve a better lifestyle in the future? I don't know what they want. I don't think they know what they want, and that's why they'll lose this debate. One question we're going to answer before moving on to my substantive about how underpopulation in developed countries, which is what they want to talk about, is harmful. Let's not conflate all types of countries here. There are two types of countries. Firstly, countries with naturally growing birth rates like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan
countries which the problems that Myth tried to describe happen where countries where people are in poverty, people don't know that having children will become a cost to them in the long run, where families are actively trying to get bigger and bigger, and governments are pursuing birth control policies, have a seat, like teaching them family planning, distributing condoms, campaigns to encourage families that have smaller families, not ones that apparently, according to Myth, trying to maintain an artificially bloated population. In their world, these countries, according to them, shouldn't pursue this policy. What does that mean? This means allowing people on the ground, which according to them, don't know anything about the cost of having children, don't know that sending a kid to college will cost them tons of money, don't know that having a larger family is disproportionately harmful to them, to continuously grow. Have a seat. So I don't know what they're trying to do. If they analyze what's harms of poverty, about how governments are corrupt, and how these people will live a long and miserable life, have a seat. But at the same time, they want the population to grow, they want more people to be in poverty, they want more children to be unable to access public schooling, and they want these people to live a life which in IMF analysis was never rebutted, facing an intergeneral poverty where their children are unable to access the facilities and opportunities that their parents have. Have a seat. Then they came out and say, you know what? It's actually a good thing because when we have more people, we have more economic growth, and like China, once we have economic growth, then we can pursue birth control policies. That's not how it works. China's economic growth comes in tandem with their one-child policy. Because as Ayman told you, when we reduce the population, when we don't have that many mouths to feed, the problem here isn't a lack of labor, it's too much labor. And when there's too much labor, you need to pump money into welfare, you need to pump money into schooling. All the harm that Ayman told you never responded to by OG, but have a seat. But also they try to talk to us, you know what? Under the one-child policy, children suffer, female fetuses are aborted. What happens in your world? In your world where the money is limited, your female child will never be able to go to school. When the children are sick, the male child will be one sent to hospital. In your world, it will be equally worse. In our world, at least, when we have population control in the short run, when we actually are able to build our economy and make sure our citizens get basic education, then we can achieve the long-term change that you wanted to achieve. Have a seat. Then we can have a more educated populace that knows what they're doing. It's wrong. And then they want to talk to us about corrupt governments. Come on now. If you want to talk about Bangladesh, the government is corrupt and they want to build more population, you know what they do. If they don't do anything, the population will also continue to grow. I don't see what change can you affect on your side. We need to talk about governments who are trying to reduce their population in underpopulated states, and that's what we are trying to talk about. Yes.
So in countries like Bangladesh, there are no robust welfare systems. So even if you have many populations, the government doesn't take care of them. So why can't a farmer have many children, make sure they uplift themselves from poverty, have one child that goes to college, and then have subsequently better sex education and incentivize them to have lower population in the future?
I think the Bangladeshi government should distribute welfare to the kids, but even if they don't, we think that in a world where there's more children, I don't see how, when they have many children and they are in poverty, suddenly this one kid who goes to college will suddenly be the best kid in the world and uplift Bangladesh out of poverty. When you have a lot of people to feed and we have a lot of population, so all the harms that Ayman talked to you will never be occurred. And what's the comparative? In a world of opposition, when we actively enact birth control and there's less children, more children can go to college. So I don't see why your benefits cannot exist in our world, but we make sure that change occurs faster and there's less children people can actually control. Second type of countries with shrinking birth rates, right? And I'm going to integrate this into my rebuttal about what underpopulation in developed countries is harmful. They think that the biggest problem in underdeveloped countries is automation. We don't think so, because in developed countries where there's less of a population, most of these people will have relatively well-earning jobs. Scandinavian countries have high standards of living. Automation doesn't really affect them that much. Have a seat. What's the problem? The problem is for blue-collar jobs, things that automation cannot replace, like janitors, like construction workers. What do these countries do? Have a seat. They more often not increase the flow of immigrants. And in the world of government, where they stop trying to control this population, why is this harmful? Notice the point of this argument is not to prove that the influx of immigrants is a bad thing. We won't say that. It is to tell you that the stance of the government, have a seat, when they actively abandon all efforts to maintain their population size, will cause a disproportionate effect on these immigrants. How? In a status quo,
when there's already an influx of immigrants in these developed countries, notably Western Europe, America, or even Japan, these foreigners are being perceived as invading their countries. There's a strong sense of xenophobia against these people because they are perceived to be coming in to take over our culture, take over our jobs, destroy our societal order, although that might not be true. So the only counter-narrative that governments have in status quo is through measures to increase their birth rate in these countries. Why is that so? It's because through these measures, they can send a message to the population. Look, we're not trying to abandon you. We're not trying to turn our country into an Islamic state. We're just trying to make up for the shortage in labor. In your world, when you abandon all efforts to control the population, what will happen? Firstly, we tell you there will be a net increase of racism, not only on the governmental level, but on the street level. Microaggressions, when we see laborers on the street, thinking of them as people as trying to steal our jobs. But secondly, it's much harder to push for integration policies in the world of government, because on the ground, when people are spooked, when people are scared, there's increased paranoia that my government is trying to turn me into an Islamic state. All your integration policies that you're trying to push forward, trying to say these people are just here to make a living, were more likely to fail. In your world, in a world where governments don't actively control their population, underdeveloped countries will be a hell for the poor, and developed countries will be hell for the most vulnerable citizens there trying to earn a living. Never even thought of those folks.
It is very regretful that nobody in this debate has so far talked about the role of government and rights of citizens. And ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that unborn people do not have rights, but those on this world have. We totally agree with opening opposition that yes, we need to have better welfare. Yeah, we probably need to give better education to the next generation. But we think that does not include abusing the people already on this earth. That doesn't include children who are born after the one-child policy, who do not have a hukou, which is basically their official identity, and as such cannot access any official schooling, any medical kind of provision that opening government have talked about. We see those are real people already living on this earth, and those are the people that you need to cater to. And moreover, we have talked about that there are men and women, adults, getting sterilized against their will in India and China, when they're controlling the kind of controlling TFR, as you have talked about in those kind of Haman policy that you are going to propose. We see that this is abhorrent. This is against an adult's agency, any person's agency. This is a humiliation to their human rights and something a government cannot do. We see opening opposition already lost their moral high ground. No, thank you. But moreover, we see that their argument is totally unfeasible. Not to mention the point that by bringing up we're only going to reduce population in third world countries, they're utterly unresponsive to government side. We see that they talked about, we're going to decrease without mentioning an exact mechanism. They only gave examples about India, China. That is why I assume that they're going to adopt very draconian measures. But even if they're going to adopt soft-line measures, they probably wouldn't work. Because if you adopt soft-line measures, like a little bit of money given to each family that only has one child or two children, probably the cultural influence much stronger than that. Probably if you're in a majority conservative Muslim village, you are forced by everyone else to have 3 or more children, or to have children until you have a son if you are born in India, ladies and gentlemen. So we see that kind of policy probably wouldn't work. So what about the draconian policies? I've already told you that in states where the government have a strong power like China and India, it's very likely to result in abuse and underreported population who live a miserable life, not because the state is not going to provide for them, but because they do not even dare to go to state services for fear of a huge fine on their parents or punishment like that. But secondly, we see there are countries where you do not have the political capital for you to actually reduce those birth rates through draconian measures. We talk about Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, in a majority Muslim country, how are you going to go around and sterilize people without causing a huge political backlash? The Islamic Party in Bangladesh is extremely powerful, and they might even start a civil war or anything against the government. We see not all governments have the ability to do that. So what can we do under this kind of scenario? We see that actually their issue is a non-issue. Why? Because the developing countries in this world, their TFR, most of them are already reducing, stagnating, or the rate of growth is increasing because population respond to markets instead of to the kind of incentive to government provide. For example, ladies and gentlemen, in Thailand and Vietnam, their birth rate dropped as fast as China's without one-child policy because Thailand and Vietnam switched to service sector and things that do not require intensive labor, ladies and gentlemen. So we see their case has already fallen. So moving on to my own extension. Quite a few extensions. No, thank you. First of all, I'm gonna extend on the mechanisms that OG provided, plus our own mechanism. And secondly, I'm going to talk about in terms of increasing birth rates, why it is also unnecessary and cannot be done. So first of all, we can have AI, we can have automation, all of that. I agree with you very much. So what happens is that why is mutually exclusive on our side? It's because when we have fewer human population, thank you. I agree with you that when we have fewer human population, we do have more resources to to support AI innovation, automation innovation, and so on. We do have the funding to make sure that everyone displaced in this procedure do have somewhere better to go. For example, giving them a pension or something. We see that we have to have a smooth transition phase on the outside of the house. But what's better is because AI is actually inevitable. So, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you. AI is actually inevitable. So what is better is that, yes, we do have a more educated workforce, ladies and gentlemen. Because when we have fewer people in developed countries, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking under this scenario, in developed countries, we can provide everyone with a university education instead of high school education. That means during the transition phase of AI, when we still need managerial jobs and coordination jobs, we have very few demand for very skilled workers. It's only our side of the house that can actually fulfill this kind of demand, ladies and gentlemen. The high inadequately educated unemployed population will cause political unrest that go against this kind of AI innovation, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. Because they actually have voted were displaced and all that. So eventually you do not have high technology. You do not have more efficient AI to take care of your service sector and everything of production. You do not have better goods and services under their side of the house. You're slowing down the progression under their side of the house. No, thank you. You're irrelevant. So, but secondly, we also talk about when you have more people, more AI, you're more unemployment, which is quite clear from the argument I raised just now. So secondly, we're going to engage with we're going to engage with the kind of third world countries they're talking about today, right? So we see that, yes, there might be a transition phase, during which we might need immigration from the third world country, which is our mechanism, exclusively coming from CG. How is this important? Because we believe that immigration is inevitable in this global village, but it happens better on the our side due to a pull factor when you need this transitional phase, you need labor force, rather than on their side of the house, where it's push factors that push people out of these countries into developed countries, because you have less political opposition to the influx of these people, because you genuinely recognize that these people belong to here. You genuinely recognize that they should come here because you need them. We see in this kind of scenario, we have less xenophobia, with less racism, and so on. We believe it's better for the construction of a global village, better for your social cohesion and everything, and better and so on, ladies and gentlemen. So we believe it is better. So we also think it's unjust for people that do not choose to be baby machines. So for example, in Singapore, if you're a married couple, you probably receive priority in housing or and so on. But what about the people who do not want to get married? What about people who do not want to be baby machines at such a young age, who want to have an actual career in a stressful environment in Singapore? They do not get priority in housing. They cannot even apply for an HDB until 35 years old. We see that it's clearly unjust for this kind of government intervention to discriminate people for their own agency, their own choices. With that, I rest the CG case.
Alright, thank you, Member of the Government. We now have our parties.
As much as the three of us in this lovely L shape had fun
making fun of OO earlier, I think it's a little bit too far to call the theme irrelevant when you don't explain why the alternatives and the opportunities that our side present are irrelevant. Because notice, this debate is happening in an extreme. We have an opening opposition that wants to defend overpopulation. We have an opening government that wants to talk about China and underpopulation. I think in closing opposition, we're going to be the reasonable ones. This debate happens in a middle ground. So we assume these are countries that have all right populations, they have okay steps, they want to take some steps to maintain that population. And in closing opposition, we will win the debate for being the reasonable one. So first of all, I have a couple of responses. First of all, to opening government. Firstly, there are two main ideas that they bring to us. One, states cannot act because states are ignorant, they're irrational. Sure, I agree. States make really bad decisions sometimes, but the comparative is individuals making those decisions for you. So what does this mean? If a state that has access to statistics, Harvard law, Stanford law, the mathematics industry are making bad decisions, can you imagine what decision Navin is going to make? The guy that spends half his time making memes, surfing the dark web of Reddit. I am going to make the worst possible choice ever. So I agree. Governments make bad decisions, but individuals left alone to their own devices make worse decisions. Secondly, this idea, the poor will lift themselves out of poverty because they will try. Wow, I'm really excited. I finally met another Republican in the debating scene. So what does this mean? Yeah, great. I would love for them to lift themselves out of poverty, but they cannot. At the point in which that you have 5 children and you immediately tell them that your responsibility is to uplift yourself from poverty, the first thing they're going to do is take a job. All 5 of them will work. They'll work the 12-hour factory job. None of them will go to college because of the insane emotional burden that you've placed on them. Even if they go to college, how do they survive? They are literally poor. I'm born in a middle-class family and I can barely afford university. PTPN apparently doesn't really like me either, so I can't go. How do they go? You don't understand. Secondly, in closing opposition, no thank you. First of all, wow, suddenly civil war is going to erupt in Bangladesh. China is going to collapse. Shanghai is going to fall to the ground. Okay, sure. Just like how you call them irrelevant, right? So first of all, like you said, governments take progressive steps. So correct. The Islamic Republic of Bangladesh will not go full-on Gordon Ramsay and force everyone to have an abortion. It will come in reasonable stages. Maybe some sex education, maybe some education on consent first. Then comes the abortions. Then comes maybe more sex education. But the difference then is, where does the money to fund all of this come at the point in which that you want active redistribution, which means your governments are stretched thin and also want to sex educate? You have to choose one. Either your sex education is better or your health care is better. Make that choice. Secondly, wait. Yeah, this is the best part. So first of all, this big idea, since both people are pushing it, immigration. Guys, immigration is terrible. You know why? Let me tell you why. I'm brown. Japan hates me. My own country, Malaysia, dislikes me. I'm a second-class citizen here. No country would want to take individuals into it. Even the most liberal, Sweden, is now telling refugees to bunk off. They're deporting hundreds of thousands of individuals by the moment. It is true. Maybe immigration can do it, but also immigration is exclusionary in nature. You have smaller amounts of individuals entering your country. So all the arguments about economic optimization and overpopulation doesn't work at the point in which that you have too little people to do it. So that's the end of my responses. My extension is going to be very simple. Two things. Firstly, why governments are sometimes right to be coercive. Second, in which world is autonomy best utilized? Yes, Rizal.
Okay, so of course, your generic response that governments sometimes get right is perfectly reasonable. But this debate is about when governments incentivize people to take on short-term financial incentives, can't keep up with the exponential monetary costs. We're not talking about whether people should determine economic policy. We're talking about whether or not who should be determining their own financial obligations.
That entire statement is a contradiction. You want individuals to decide, or you want some form of intervention? What do you want? I don't understand. I really don't. I'm not being mean. You people think I was working on arguments with them. No, I'm trying to figure out what they're trying to say. First of all, why are governments right to sometimes be coercive? So I think, first of all, individuals are irrational. But what exactly does irrational mean in this debate? I think individuals do not understand the implications of the choices because they are born and bred under the fallacy that sometimes having children or not having children is the best way to optimize your opportunities. So what does this mean? A lot of these individuals don't have access to data. They don't have access to economic opportunities. The second thing we talk is like, nobody thinks about the third-party harms to the individuals that you have when you make that choice. Like, I think a great example is like this entire culture where we have children, right? Can someone explain to me what's the difference between having a child and adopting a child? Not much, right? But still, we all make that active decision to have a child. That problem is that we rob another individual of the autonomy to have a better life. Almost going to be 6 already. The comparative then becomes, in the world of government, individuals also do not think of the long-term effects of it. The only people that will steer these decisions are the governments. The only individuals that can make the best individual at that point is the government. Second thing, I also think individuals are